And from AI and privacy-enhancing technologies, we are now switching to our other focus topic of today, the international data transfers and data sovereignty, a debate which has, of course, always been going on, but has somewhat intensified periodically. And as we always strive to bring you not only the most interesting and important topics, but also the most interesting speakers, I'm very happy to be able to announce Dr. Aruna Sharma. She's the Global Head of Privacy and Regulatory Affairs at TikTok, and she'll be talking us through the TikTok project Clover, which aims at strengthening European data sovereignty, and there's another similar project going on, which we'll talk about in a second. But first of all, thank you, Aruna, for joining us and for taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca. Just wanted to make sure. Is my sound okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's fine. Perfect. Thank you. Shall we just dive right in? I think most of our audience are aware that, of course, there is a debate about data sovereignty, about like kind of a Europe centricity going on. What do you perceive? What are some of the challenges when dealing with the EU legal framework, especially when it comes to data transfers globally?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that because TikTok has been dealing with a lot of these issues for a long time. Should I answer your question, or should we go into the presentation? And in a way, I will answer this as part of my presentation. But I can say that in particular, I think various countries right now are considering restrictions on transfer of data and access to data for various reasons. And that is, of course, an issue for larger platforms, larger tech companies in general. And that is very much in focus and is very much being discussed. But technically, that should be a concern for every company that is considering offering goods and services outside of their jurisdiction, because these restrictions impact any organization that is somehow involved with data. And of course, pretty much everyone is moving and processing and collecting data these days. So, Rebecca, should I start with a presentation maybe?
Can you, yeah, I am already seeing the presentation, Aruna.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so, because I was only like trying to set the topic and set the stage. So absolutely feel free to guide us through the project itself. And I guess we'll have a few follow-up questions afterwards. Just a quick note, the sound is somewhat like sketchy sometimes. I don't know if it's on our end or on yours.
Yeah, I'll try to get a little bit closer to the screen. Is that better?
I think so. I think you need to talk a bit more, then we'll see.
Okay, I'll talk very loud. Tell me if I'm shouting. So, okay, that's great. So thank you so much for the introduction. So as Rebecca has said, I lead the Global Privacy and Regulatory Affairs team at TikTok. This is part of the legal department. So my team advises on privacy, information security, legal issues, as well as the responsible use for data. And data sovereignty, of course, is becoming a increasingly large aspect of this work. Generally, when we talk about data sovereignty, TikTok has been very much, and I'll go back, otherwise the image is probably a little bit distracting. I wanted to speak today about Project Clover, which is the project of TikTok to address European data sovereignty aspects. And our data governance approach is very much targeted and aligned with the European data sovereignty approach. The reason why we have been working on this is because data protection law, of course, looks more at data access, data transfers, and we have been working on a concept which in many aspects I would consider industry leading to address technical issues with restrictions on data access and transfer. And before we maybe talk more about the concept of data sovereignty, which I would like to get into to set the backdrop to the discussion of the project that TikTok is working on, I wanted to also briefly describe what TikTok is, because I know a lot of people, especially amongst privacy professionals, have heard of TikTok, but some people may not have actually looked at the app. So TikTok is an entertainment platform. It is an entertainment platform focused very much on short form videos. And you can see it here on the left. If you were to open the TikTok app on mobile, this is what the user interface looks like, and this is what you would see. So there are a lot of videos from various creators around the world. The creators, you can become a creator just by using the technology and recording a video. There are a lot of creative tools that you can use. There's a lot of content. So for example, you see here examples, art, gardening, cooking, and various other things. But the main point about the platform is that creators can create content. Users of the platform can become creators, but can also use and watch these videos. And the platform connects users across the world. So for example, a creator in Japan can find an audience in the US or in South Africa or in Germany. And that is important to emphasize, because if we talk about data sovereignty, that is one of the core features of the platform, to connect users across borders. Data sovereignty, in contrast to thinking about a global platform that connects users amongst each other, is very much the idea that countries and governments are limiting or restricting the way that the data within their jurisdiction is accessed or transferred, and want to maintain jurisdiction over that data. In some cases, forcing that data to reside in country, or in other ways making sure that the jurisdictions extends to all data that is being collected from their citizen or residents. And there are various reasons why data sovereignty regimes are established. And in the EU, of course, we are thinking primarily, I think, about privacy as a reason for that, and thinking about the transfer restrictions that are based on the GDPR, on the idea that data of European residents and citizens should be subject to the same level of protections, an equivalent level of protection, as if that data would be still reside in the EU when transferring it outside of the EU, or obtaining access from outside of the EU. But interestingly, privacy is not necessarily the main objective of data sovereignty laws across the world, and there are more and more of these laws established. So in a lot of cases, national security, national sovereignty aspects come into play, where governments want to actually restrict information or cultural influences, or from the national security side, they want to protect their national security interests, like critical infrastructure, and other considerations come into play. Those considerations don't necessarily have to do connected to privacy. In some instances, they may conflict with privacy. There's also the interest of governments to ensure that law enforcement gets access to data that is collected in the country for easier access. And then, of course, sometimes there are considerations that pertain to protective practices. So to the idea, if data has to be stored within country, then there may be local infrastructure providers that are benefiting, and other service providers that are benefiting from that. But this is very important if we are talking about data sovereignty, to acknowledge that privacy is not always the only reason why these laws exist. And there may be inherent conflicts when we are talking about data sovereignty regimes between different countries. So here's an inconvenient fact. Unfortunately, the internet does not understand borders. It is the World Wide Web. And when we are talking about the flow of information, I think in the context of internet, that becomes much more clear, although of course there have been thoughts about sometimes restrictions or efforts have been made. But the idea is that information and connection is possible amongst different people in different countries, and that's how the technology largely works. At the same time, there are also now, with the increased digitization of goods and services and connected goods, even if we are thinking about products that are collecting data, that are creating data, if business is done in different jurisdictions, we need to think about the data aspect of that. As I mentioned when we started the conversation, it's really not possible to think about business processes anymore, or any other processes like international communication without data being created. And that is a fact that needs to be acknowledged. So what does that mean for companies? There are, as a best case scenario, and there are also risks. And I would say right now, we are probably more on the risk side of this equation. In a best case scenario, there are clear global norms and standards that create certainty for organizations and for companies how data can be transferred. And there's alignment in those regimes, and that allows companies to navigate that for if there's an intention to do business across borders. And then on the technology side, if there are emerging technologies, and that's certainly something that we have been working on to dive deeper in the technology side of data sovereignty, that is also a best case scenario that's available and enables companies large and smaller to navigate data sovereignty restrictions based on an international agreements or standards that can be adhered to. But there are also risks when establishing data sovereignty regimes. And I think that's what we are seeing right now, that there are conflicting and competing national standards. It makes it very difficult for companies to navigate that. It's great for lawyers, but it creates a lot of challenges on the business side. At the moment, when we are looking at the EU, for example, now the GDPR has been in place for about 5 years. And so the question is, how many countries have been acknowledged as adequate jurisdictions for the transfer of data? And the last time I checked, I think we had 15, that is including the US, where we have the new agreement and framework on the Privacy Shield. We'll see where that goes, but it's not a lot if we think about global trade, if we think about the international context of business or personal interactions. And so that's definitely a risk that we're seeing right now. There are significant costs associated with complying with these laws and building processes and technology to comply. And we have been definitely experiencing that. The company has invested significant resources, for example, for Project Clover to address European data sovereignty concerns. And that brings it to my last point here, that this is going to be challenging not only for large companies, large platforms, but this is also challenging for companies that may not have the technical resources to work on these extremely large scale processes and establish technologies for that reason. So what does that mean for all of us? National governments will strengthen their control over their domestic internet. So I think there is a concern that we would end up with digital islands, that there is no more of the World Wide Web, but that information is captured in jurisdictions or regions and connection is not possible. And so if we don't have global standards, how to deal with data sovereignty considerations, that will prevent essentially communication and connection amongst people. And that is something that goes beyond just business considerations, but generally, how do we want to engage globally with each other? So in order to establish trust, we have three key pillars that we have been working on. And it is interesting. So data sovereignty is one of the core pillars. We are also dealing with content assurance, compliance, governance, and oversight, which very much factors into the data sovereignty pillar. Interestingly, the EU has already a lot of legislation that is addressing these concerns. That is not necessarily the case for other jurisdictions. And so the EU, I would say, is advanced in a lot of ways to create more legal certainty. Zooming in a little bit into the data sovereignty pillar, we have core tenets of Project Clover. So Project Clover is specifically a European data governance project. One is data localization, very important. And I think when the European system initially was thought out, it was more about where is the data stored. So where are data centers hosted? And that is what we are addressing. We also have enhanced data controls and restrictions in place. And we are engaging with a third party that will provide oversight over our project and the controls that we put in place. And that's a very important aspect of that. Here's our data localization roadmap. We will have, speaking about data localization, 3 data centers in Europe. So they have been already opened in Ireland. We have 2, and then there is 1 in Norway. And so with regard to data localization, we have opened our first Irish data center. The migration of EEA and UK user data is already underway into this data center. Our second Irish data center will come online in 2024, and the same with the Norway data center. And I'm saying on these slides, EEA and UK, just to be comprehensive, but generally for the purposes of the presentation, I'm talking about European user data, which is addressing EEA as well as UK. We will do a full migration of the personal data of EEA and UK users by the end of 2024. So that will mean all European user data will reside in region. And until the European data centers are fully operational, we will use the Google Cloud services in the US. That is essentially Project Clover, essentially is building a European enclave. And on the path to that, we have already segregated that data in the Google Cloud. Setting up data centers is a long road and a lot of effort and very costly, but we are working on this with a lot of speed to be ready in 2024 to do this. We also work on enhanced data controls and restrictions. So we do have a multi-tiered access approval process in place to ensure that access is restricted and granted on a case-by-case basis, depending on need. I want to emphasize that we have technical controls that enable that, and that is through our secure gateways. So Project Clover will have security gateways that will be the gateways to the access to European user data. And it is a combination of policies and processes to ensure that data is stored locally, only accessed to the extent possible by employees in the EU, and also ensuring that there's interoperability, because I mentioned that TikTok is a global platform that users can interact with each other. And so to optimize for local data processing, but as well as not creating a platform that is essentially cut off from everybody else. And with regard to all of that, our access controls, our technology that is supporting Project Clover, we are also using a third-party security provider who will co-manage Project Clover with us and the security gateway environments, and helps us to oversee the limitation of data access and data flow. And lastly, as I just mentioned, we will have third-party oversight. There is oversight 24/7, 365 days per year. There will be security monitoring. There will be detailed source code reviews as well of the security gateways, because they are core of our solution. And the third party will help us validate the data types that are being transferred and accessed. So there's a comprehensive view on what goes through the gateway and what is accessed through gateways where applicable. We also validate the network traffic that goes through the security gateways, and we are using privacy enhancing technologies. And that is something that we have also invested a lot of resources in, working with third party to make sure that we can use technology in cases where data still may have to flow just for functionality and interoperability purposes. We do security assessments of the platform. The third party will do that on our behalf. And then we are also working on the physical security assessment of the European data centers, because of course, that's another security concern. So to summarize, we have established a very comprehensive way to look at data sovereignty and address the concerns about the protection of European data, at the same time taking into account how can this work in practice, because that is often the conflict, the inherent conflict between the current data sovereignty regime and the needs in order to operate a platform or technology services. And lastly, I wanted to share with you that we have announced that we work with the NCC Group, a UK company, as our independent security provider. So with that, I think I can close the presentation as an overview. I hope that was helpful.
It absolutely was, Aruna, and I'm very glad that you used the time to give us an overview about the project, but also like shedding some light about on why you're doing it, basically, and maybe we can dive a bit deeper into that question particularly, because seeing that it's not really a legal requirement that you're like aiming to fulfill here. You're investing a lot of money and resources into something that is not like legally binding. But for you, data sovereignty is obviously such an important project. Can you elaborate a bit more on the why of it all?
Yeah, of course. And I think, I mean, of course, everyone knows that we are very much in the spotlight when it comes to data sovereignty concerns. And the approach that we have been trying to take is to say we want to proactively address data sovereignty concerns and want to develop something. And this has been in the making for many years. This is not something, and the people who are familiar with technology will understand what an effort that is. It is hard to describe. It is an enormous technological effort. Some of the technologies that we're talking about are being developed, and there's an enormous amount of cost that the company incurs for this. But we acknowledge the European data sovereignty approach. We are obviously wanting to comply with the idea, the underlying GDPR principles. And so that is what we have put in action here, and wanted to develop something that is industry leading and maybe also showing a path of how global platforms can work with data sovereignty requirements in the EU and elsewhere. But as I mentioned, they are actually sometimes conflicting, and that is a challenge that I think all organizations and companies are continuing to face.
The conflicting requirements and also the differences that definitely exist in the regions, is that also why there are two of the projects, so Project Texas and Clover, or yeah, why did you decide to do 2 times over?
Yeah, for the purposes of the this presentation, of course, I focused a little bit more on Europe, but I should say that in general, the company has followed a path of taking data sovereignty considerations into account. And we have been working in the US on a comparable project, Project Texas, that has been publicly discussed. There, the concerns were more on the national security side. And as I mentioned, when I talked about data sovereignty, it is not in every country and jurisdiction the same objective that is being pursued. But whatever the objective, we are trying to develop technology and approaches that can work across jurisdictions. So it's not going to be the same in every case. But there are underlying principles that we are adhering to, and we are taking a very principled approach to the way that we look at data sovereignty.
That's fascinating, and because you mentioned the differences in the projects themselves. Are there also differences in the data security levels, or is it just a different kind of setup?
Yeah, I would very much say it's a different kind of setup, although the underlying technology that we are using is the same, or the same. We are using the same principles and approaches, but there are specific requirements that exist in the US that do not exist in the US, in the EU, and the other way around. So we have to take that into account. The regimes are not the same. And it's actually very interesting to me that given that privacy is so much front and center of the European way of looking at data sovereignty and data transfers in general, that the US approach comes much more from a national security perspective, and that even a few years ago, data transfers were not really a big topic in the US, not to the degree that they were in the EU. On the contrary, sometimes there were debates in the US about how seriously Europeans take data transfers and the restrictions, and I think that really demonstrates that there's a slightly different view, although I think in more recent times, the attention has shifted, and the acknowledgement of the importance of the way that data transfers are being addressed has risen. But I wanted to emphasize, I mean, this is one of the core tenets, as I said, of our project, that we say it is where possible. Data localization in a region is one of the core principles and is acknowledged, but at the same time, this tension with, if there is a global platform that wants to connect people, it makes it challenging, and I think everyone needs to think about how that could end up if you are thinking about the European regime in its last consequence, because right now the regime is very static and not really tailored, I think, to practical needs of organizations.
You mentioned that the migration is already like planned. There are steps that you are going to like implement and go through. What will the migration and the shift mean for the millions of users of the TikTok platform? Will they notice, or how will that go?
Well, hopefully they won't notice. We are trying to do this all behind the scenes. I don't think in the short term and this is one of the objectives also of our project, is to make this as seamless as possible. So it is still possible for users to see a video in Brazil, for example, and to interact. And the user interface that I showed is, I wanted to also say, it is interaction on our platform. So it is posting a video, consuming of videos, but you can also comment on videos or you can like them. So there is interaction possible amongst users. And of course, we are trying to maintain that to the extent possible.
Thank you so much, Aruna, for all of these insights. I'd like to mention that I think it's great that you also covered the privacy-enhancing technologies in your presentation, because I've found throughout the day there has been an issue that basically every company is now trying to tackle and are developing further. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what you all, basically all amazing companies out there, develop in the field of privacy-enhancing technologies as well, on the way to all the projects you are doing. Yeah, thank you, Aruna, for today. Happy to stay in touch and discuss more details. Yeah, in due time. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.